Okay, welcome back everyone. This is Bill Dow. This is video 3, how to shut down a PMO. I hope you enjoyed the first 2 videos, but now it's time to actually walk through the process of shutting down a PMO. My name is Bill Dow. I have 26 years of hands-on experience. Been at Microsoft for 12 years, AT&T Wireless, the government of British Columbia for 9 years. Lots and lots of hands-on experience and constantly giving back. I've been a presenter at PMI, several PMI conferences. I'm a speaker at Bellevue College. I'm a teacher there. I work with a project group, work with MPUG, Project Summit World. I've been speaking at several conferences. I'm a 4-time author, the PMO Lifecycle, Building, Running, and Shutting Down, Project Management Communication Tools, my first PMO book, The Tactical Guide for Building a PMO, and then back in 2008, I wrote my first book, Project Management Communication Bible. Very active on Twitter, Facebook, projectmanagement.com. Please come join me on LinkedIn and then projecttimes.com as well. So very, very excited to present this information on how. Okay, we're really excited. We got a great agenda today. We're going to talk about shutting down a PMO. We'll go over the loss of executive support. We'll give you the detailed steps to shutting down a PMO. And of course, we'll wrap up and we'll give you some additional information. So very, very excited. Let's get started on video 3. Shutting down a PMO. And when you jump into shutting down a PMO, you really have to think they're going to shut down for multiple reasons, right? Finances, a program finishes, a reorg, an executive leaves. Regardless of the reason on why the PMO shut down, the PMO is shut down. And you're in the position where you got to start reversing the things that you've really built during the first 2 series and during your course of building your PMO. So let's talk about that. Let's look at building a PMO and really talk about that as well. So building a PMO, we talked about the 12 steps. I won't drain those steps. You've seen them before. We've talked about them lots, and so let's look at that and spend a minute and just look at those steps and make sure you'd set those up. Clearly, this is not the time to set those up now. You would have set them up in the building and running phases. And then we jumped in video 2, we talked about running a PMO and all the steps to running a PMO. So let's look at those. We really broke that down into 4 major steps. Develop executive reports, develop the PMO reports, and then we got real tactical and we talked about the day-to-day operations. And then finally we wrapped up with step 4 was PMO resources, and we talked about the mentoring and buddy systems and all the goodness that came around with that. So the steps to shutting down a PMO is essentially reversing what you built and what you ran, right? And so really looking at those 2 areas, and it's stepping back and saying, well, we got to start reversing those. And so this whole presentation really is based on the fact that you're going to be reversing what you did in the building and what you've set up in that running. It's pretty straightforward, but we'll walk you through it. But basically, it is the reversing of these 2 areas. So shutting down a PMO. So let's talk about kind of that whole process of shutting it down. So like I said, shutting down the PMO is reversing the steps that you took in creating and running your PMO. Tackling these areas logically, though, is a great way to ensure a complete shutdown, right? If you're just handling this randomly, you may not cover all the items that you need to cover and all the things that you've set up. Take the time and plan the shutting down of your PMO. Don't just walk away from your PMO, right? PMO shut down all this time. This won't be your first experience. It won't be your last experience. But you want to do this professionally, and you want to do it in a planfully and structured manner. It's definitely an emotional time, though. Let's be clear. It's an emotional. You're going to be worried about mortgages and getting laid off, and right. Don't be surprised and basically face those emotions because we've all been through it. It's essentially it's the emotional side of a PMO manager's job, and it's just something that you're going to have to deal with. This won't be your first and/or your last PMO. But the great thing is I say embrace the challenge. If your company wants to shut down the PMO, shut it down, no problem. There's always another PMO. Keep your eye out, keep looking out internally or even externally out of the company, but there's always PMO starting up. And so yes, embrace the emotional side of things, but don't get too caught up on it because there's always another PMO. You're essentially at the point where you have no longer got the executive support, right? The executives have said, we need to shut it down. You could have lost your executive support. We talked about scenarios where potentially finances have gone away, or basically for some reason you don't have the executive support to continue your PMO going forward. Right? And we talked in video 1 about that PMO cycle. Well, you're in the middle of that cycle right now. And you've got that big X. And that X basically states, hey, we're shutting this thing down. The programs and projects will probably not go away, but that structure and that organization is going to go away. And so this is exactly where you're at now. There's millions of reasons why PMO shut down, right? Lack of executive support, the program the PMO was built around shut down, it finished, it completed. You've got org changes, you've got structural changes. It happens all the time. And so just think about that's going to happen and it's going to continue to happen. And that's what you deal with as a life of a PMO manager. That's just part of the job description and you got to get used to it. But there's millions of different reasons why PMO shut down. However, there are things that can be done in shutting down your PMO in a very organized way. Right? It's obviously a very stressful time for you, the PMO manager. So I love having that checkbox, right? I love having those things that you have to do because it's going to really make your life a lot easier to go through and really follow those steps of going through those. Continue to use your PMO employees as well, right? They're going to help you as long as they're around and they're part of your PMO. Make sure you use them to help you shut down your PMO in that organized and that structured way. Remember though, it's not personal, it's just business. This won't be the first or your last PMO that you will shut down, so embrace it. Be strong, go through this with the same passion you did starting your PMO. Go out that same way. I can't stress that enough. But it's not personal and it's not about you. It's a business decision. And so just remember that as you start up PMOs and as you shut down PMOs, it's just business. So let's look for that structured checkbox approach, right? I love that, right? Let's have all the tasks to shutting down a PMO. And let's look at these tasks in order of importance. And then, right, we've put them in order of importance. The least is obviously at the bottom, but the structure and the tasks we're about to show you are actually in importance order. And so very important to tackle them in that way. Right? The timing of shutting down a PMO, right? Once an executive says, oh, I want to shut down a PMO, they think it can be done overnight. It's not possible. You want to set expectations. You want to have a plan. You want to say, look, it's not going to take overnight. It's not going to be overnight. There's things I have to do. And so I feel really good about having that plan and having these things we're about to show you and then walking through that appropriate timeline. Make sense? Excellent. All right, well, let's look at that list. So what are the steps to shutting down a PMO? Well, let's look at those steps now. Okay, let's look at those steps now. So there's 7 steps in shutting down a PMO. They are creating a project schedule. Step 2 is review the resources, your FTEs and your contractors or vendors, and look for different roles for them in the organization. Number 3, shut down your mentoring and buddy systems, right? We talked about them in the building and in the running, and now it's time to shut those down formally. Number 4, review all financial billing and determine the next steps to close out. Number 5, review software contracts and maintenance contracts, right? And understand what they have in place and then how you can go about closing those down. And number 6 is shutting down and really reviewing the PMO materials, shutting down the sites, archiving the sites, backing up the sites, and then finally your PMO shut down. And that's the final step where the PMO is no longer an organization and you're done. The work is done. So these are the 7 steps in shutting down a PMO. Let's jump into now each of those steps in much more detail and walk you through that process. So one of the best practices that you're going to want to make sure you do is create a plan, right? That was step 1, and it's really about making sure you have an organized and structured way of shutting down your PMO. And it's really going to give you the best chance, right? If you just do this randomly, you're never going to be able to do it successfully because you have to spend that time and do that in an organized fashion. So let's look at what that plan would look like. Okay, task number 1, create a project schedule for your PMO shutdown plan, right? You don't have to use project, you don't have to use a scheduling tool in general, but it will help you keep yourself the most organized, right? And so having a scheduling tool will keep you organized. If you decide to use a non-scheduling software, totally okay, but you want to spend the time and get the task down in an organized manner, right? You want to make sure you know what you're doing in what order. Many PMO managers don't take the time and plan shutting down their PMOs, and I'm strongly suggesting you do that and creating that plan. And of course, I'm going to recommend creating a schedule, right? And here's exactly what that schedule would look like. You'd have your tasks, your durations, your start, your end, you'd put some resources on that, but you'd have a formal plan in place so you can work with your executives, you can talk to your executives and say, hey, this is how long this stuff's going to take. Just because you decide to shut down a PMO doesn't mean that's going to happen tomorrow. And so having that schedule in place is going to give you that great conversation piece and really be able to have that conversation. Say it's going to take longer than you think just because you want this thing shut down. Step 2 in the process is about your PMO resources. And this really is a tricky situation, right? How do I handle the FTEs? How do I handle the vendors? It's never easy to roll someone off. It's never easy to lay someone off or have to let them go. But sadly, it is part of shutting down a PMO and part of the role of a PMO manager. And so what I've done is just giving you some tips and tricks what you can do within this process. I've done it before and it's not fun. One of the things you want to do is determine roles for employees, right? And vendors in the organization, right? If you know of direct openings, go work with those hiring managers and say, hey, can you take Adam? Hey, can you take Mary? Right? These guys are superstar employees in my PMO, and we need to move them and find them a role in the company. Right? So reach out to hiring managers, reach out to your peers inside and outside of your organization, and maybe even if you know someone outside the company as well. The top priority is your employees. You really do want to help them land something as soon as possible. It's just as stressful for them as it is for you going through that shutdown process. But make sure you take care of your employees. And then once you do your employees, then what you can do is you can then look at your contractors, right? And you say, okay, well, what can we do about our contractors now, right? And so again, there may be some superstar contractors that you want to keep around, but a lot of them will roll off, right? Some of them, you just won't have the finances in place. There won't be the jobs and the work that you had when you had a formal structured PMO. And so you're going to have to roll them off. It's not easy. They've got families, they've got mortgages. It's the same as the FTEs, but at least the contractors are kind of set up for that conversation. Once you roll the employees off and or the contractors or whatever you do with them, you have to go back and update your HR systems. You'd be surprised how many people they roll off or they let go of an employee or let go of a contractor and they never come back around and update the HR systems. So it's a critical component that you're going to want to do. regardless of where the individuals have landed in their new roles, but just make sure you've stepped back and gone back to HR and have updated the systems appropriately. So that's step 2 in the process, is taking care of your FTEs, taking care of your contractors and your vendors, but making sure that you've rolled them off appropriately. And if there's some additional roles and they've got some roles, allowing them to go to those roles. Okay. One of the steps that we talked about, both in building a PMO and shutting down, was the PMO mentoring and buddy systems. And so again, now you're shutting down your PMO, you're going to have to sit and shut down these mentoring programs as well. So I've got some best practices. So what you want to do is you want to reach out to your employees if this is a mentoring program and it's a formal system, and say, hey, we're shutting down the program. But what I say is, if the employees are going to stick around, I say keep those relationships, right? You're going to want to work with HR department, determine if there's other programs that they could be utilized, right? And other mentoring type of programs. But otherwise, tell them to keep their relationships. And even though there's not a formal system in place, if these employees are staying with the company, these relationships are critical, and even if they do it in an informal manner. But you as a PMO manager, you want to formally shut down, work with HR, and really get the steps and the processes to shut down those systems. When you think about the buddy system, the same thing. That's less formal. You'll just wrap that up fairly quickly. Just let everyone know that's part of the buddy system. You're shutting things down, and that buddy system will not continue going forward. The next step in the process is your PMO Finances, right? This is critical. This is such a critical situation when you're shutting down a PMO, because you've been working with finances throughout the life of your project or your PMO, right? And so you've bought software, you've got maintenance contracts in place, you've got POs in place. And so now you've got to think about, hey, we got to shut this down. And so what do we have to do? So one of the first things you're going to want to do is work with your finance department, right? You want to determine the process of, how do I close out POs? It's not likely that a PMO will shut down right at the end of the fiscal year, right? And so you're going to have POs for vendors, you're going to have POs for contractors, right? You cannot close out these immediately. Just because your management has said shut down a PMO, do not close out your POs. Right? Make sure you work with your finance department, transfer any budgets that's remaining to a different department, but understand your billing cycle and make sure the final bill has been processed before you shut down your PMO or your PO, sorry. You wouldn't believe how many people, if the PMO is shutting down, okay, that's it, all the POs are canceled. You can't do that. It's a financial disaster. By doing that, understand your billing cycle, understand when all the companies bill and when they have to bill. And frankly, if an executive wants to shut down a PMO, well, maybe and it's the 4th of the month, then people will probably get to bill for that remaining month. And then you can shut it down properly. But do not close out your POs automatically. That's a disaster and will require a lot of work on the finance side. And you don't want to do that to them. Right, so close out the POs after the last billing has taken place. I can't stress that enough. I've seen that happen before. I've seen POs shut down and there were still open billings, and it becomes a financial mess. Also, you're going to have, in most cases, software maintenance contracts, right? You've bought Primavera, you've bought WBS Schedule Pro, you've bought Project, you've bought all these various products, and they've got maintenance contracts and they'll have POs assigned to them. Again, you're going to have to reach out to those companies where you've got all these maintenance contracts and say, what do I do? How do I shut these down? Work with their billing, work with their finance department, work with your finance department, come up with a final bill date, get that bill processed, and then shut down the POs. But just don't be in a rush to shut down the POs. And again, it's just, you think about the complexity of that, right? And then, as we said, we look at our software and our maintenance agreements, right? We've got a ton of different software that we possibly could have bought. right? So you want to look at all the software contracts. You want to look what's been billed, how much is in the budget, what's still out there. Reaching out to those companies and say, hey, we're going to close down our maintenance contract. What does that mean? And then getting all that logistics down and then working with your finance group. Often, when you're set to shut down a PMO, you'll be assigned someone from finance you've been working with all along. You'll work with that finance contract, make sure the maintenance contracts are all billed out, everything's been processed, and then, of course, you can shut down your PO. But just do not shut that down early because it could really, really get you in a lot of trouble, and really you'll stumble with that. One of the things I think I really strongly suggest you do is you look at your PMO materials. And what do we mean by the PMO materials? Well, when we built a PMO up, we did playbooks and go no-go decks and go live decks, and we had a ton of different materials that we were executing and using, the priority list and all those various lists. And so when we talk about shutting it down, right? When we talk about Okay, the next step in the process is to review your PMO materials, your PMO sites, and start archiving and backing up. And so working with your PMO employees and start backing up all your materials, backing up your SharePoint, backing up your network drives, right? Take local copies, print out copies, create binders, right? Work with your IT to make formal backups and ensure you've got copies of this information, right? The older the PMO you have, the more content you have, and that is rich data that you just do not want to get rid of. Just because this particular PMO shuts down doesn't mean another one's not going to start up. And so you're going to want this information. You want this information that you can get back to. One of the things I absolutely love doing is creating a binder and really getting all the goodness, your priority list and your dashboards, and putting those all into a nice binder that you can use to really help sell your next PMO. Right? Have physical copies. People like to see dashboards. They like to see all the work, right? Spend the time and build your binder of materials, right? You're going to have it for years and years and years to come, right? You want to keep it within the company. You do not want to leave the company, of course, because it's all company information. But when you're asked to build your next PMO and you can say, hey, this is the kinds of stuff I've done, people are going to love seeing that, right? And so take your binder to your next interview and take your binder to your executives and say, here's all the things we've set up. We can reproduce that for you. And I strongly, strongly suggest you creating that binder. I know it's a little bit old school, but people love the touch and the feel, and they can see the dashboards and they can see the priority list and your kickoff decks and your email templates and all that stuff. And it's worth its weight in gold from a marketing perspective. So I strongly suggest you set that up. And that's it, right? You've shut down your buddy system. You've looked for new roles for your employees, right? You've looked at your software contracts. Check, check, check. You've backed up the materials. You've taken and made binders out of it, and your PMO shutdown is complete. You've walked through these steps to shut down your PMO and literally get your organization set up to move forward without that formal structure. Okay, that's it. We covered 7 steps in shutting down a PMO, right? This is going to be very common for PMO managers, right? This won't be your first PMO you shut down. It won't be your last PMO you shut down, but I say embrace it. I say tackle the shutting down with as much structure and as rigor you use to build your PMO. You want to leave your PMO with the same passion, the same excitement as you started your PMO. And just understand this is going to be something that you as a PMO manager will have to do over and over and over. I've done it 5 or 6 times across multiple companies. I am quite comfortable with this process and quite comfortable with the fact that this is just something that you're going to have to get used to doing on a regular basis. All of this information is in my brand new book, the PMO Lifecycle, Building, Running, and Shutting Down, plus much, much more. We talk about industry-leading PMOs. We talk about Agile. We talk about running the PMO. We talk about shutting the PMO. We talk about dashboards and reporting. All of that information is there. You can purchase today. It's available. It's very, very excited. People are loving it. I'm even giving you a coupon. You can get 40% off. You just go to the website, createspace.com. You can see the number there. You plug in that coupon code, and for a bonus for attending today, you will actually get 40% off the retail price. So excited about that. However, a book is only going to take you so far, right? And if you're really interested and you really want to take your PMO to the next level, then the next logical step will be to look at my PMO Lifecycle, Building, Running, and Shutting Down online course. In this course, you're going to see 19 modules. Now that's a ton of modules, and I get that, but don't be overwhelmed by it because the majority of the models go into great detail on how to build a PMO. But then there's models on running, of course, and then models on shutting down. We've got workbooks, we've got downloads that are not available right now, only available through the course. Dashboards and reporting, we go into that. We talk about lifetime access. You've got future updates to the system. We're going to have group webinars. We have live calls. We had an Ask Bill live Facebook session a while back. We also had we have a private Facebook group for direct support and help with other PMO managers going through your same class as you are. And so if you've got questions, you got help, I'm on Facebook and I'm ready to help you out. Here's my contact information. Again, Twitter, Facebook, email directly at buildout.publishingllc.com. My two books, Project Management Communication Tools and the PMO Lifecycle, Building, Running, and Shutting Down, both on Amazon. Definitely come check me out on LinkedIn as well, and I'd be excited to connect with you. And that's it. That's the end of our 3-part video series. Again, this was just a sampling of what's in the online course. I'd love for you guys to come check that out. But I hope that you enjoyed the course. I hope you enjoyed the material. Thank you again for joining me on this 3-part series. Please come check me out at buildoutpmp.com. You see I've got blogs, speaking, webinars. I'm available for mentoring and coaching. My books are up there. I've got a store up there. Come check me out, buildoutpmp.com. And thank you again. Have a great day. Thanks.